In 1998, Louis "Buddy" Musso, a 59-year-old mentally disabled man, left his home in New Jersey with one simple dream: to get married. He believed he was heading to Texas to start a new life with a woman who promised him love, family, and a fresh start. But what he got instead was torture, betrayal, and a slow, brutal death at the hands of the very people who had invited him in. At the center of it all was Suzanne Margaret Basso, a woman with a history of lies, manipulation, and cruelty. She didn't act alone. She gathered a circle of accomplices, including her own son, to carry out one of the most vicious crimes Texas has ever seen. To understand the full scope of this story, let's go back to where it all began. But before we dive in, if you haven't already subscribed, now's the time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more true crime stories like this. Suzanne Margaret Basso was born Suzanne Margaret Burns on May 15, 1954, in Schenectady, New York, the youngest of 8 children in a family weighed down by poverty, instability, and generational trauma. From an early age, Suzanne's life was marked by allegations of abuse. She would later claim that she suffered severe physical and sexual abuse at the hands of her father. Whether these claims were fact or fiction remains uncertain, but they were central to the narrative she told throughout her life, often using them to justify her later behavior and emotional detachment. During her teenage years, Suzanne was known to spin wild stories about her background and identity. These falsehoods would only deepen and become more elaborate over time. But for a while she lived what seemed to be a relatively ordinary life. In the early 1970s she married James Peake, a U.S. Marine. As Suzanne Peake, she gave birth to 2 children, a daughter and a son. But beneath the surface, trouble was always simmering. The marriage turned toxic, eventually falling apart amid disturbing allegations. After moving to Houston, Texas, Suzanne began to reinvent herself completely. Her children dropped the surname Peake and began using O'Malley, part of an Irish identity Suzanne crafted out of thin air. She herself started going by Sue O'Malley, claiming Irish-American roots and a connection to law enforcement, politics, and even high-ranking government officials. In the early 1990s, Suzanne entered into a relationship with a man named Carmine Basso, who also used the name James O'Malley, not to be confused with her son. Despite never marrying him legally, Suzanne began calling herself Suzanne Basso, and claimed Carmine was her husband. When he died in 1997, she fraudulently attempted to collect his Social Security and veterans benefits by maintaining the lie that they had been married. This act added to her long pattern of deception, one that included forged documents, false identities, and manipulative behavior. By the time Suzanne was in her 40s, her world was built almost entirely on lies. She often claimed she had served in law enforcement, said she had been a government agent, and even claimed to have connections with powerful families. None of it was true. It wasn't just fantasy, it was delusion. And it was dangerous. Professionally, Suzanne bounced between jobs as a seamstress and security guard, living in the Houston suburb of Jacinto City. Emotionally, she lived in a world of control and manipulation. Those close to her, especially vulnerable, mentally challenged, or financially dependent individuals, were often drawn into her distorted reality. Over time, she created a tight-knit but toxic group of enablers, all orbiting around her self-made mythology. Psychological evaluations later suggested that Suzanne Basso showed clear signs of narcissistic personality disorder. She exhibited pathological lying, an obsession with status, and delusions of grandeur. She believed the world owed her something, and that she could take it by force, lies, or charm. Behind the fake names, the stolen benefits, and the made-up stories was a woman who craved control and dominance. And as her personal delusions deepened, so did her willingness to exploit others to get what she wanted. It was in this warped mindset that Suzanne began to see a new target, someone she could use, manipulate, and ultimately destroy for financial gain. Louis Charles Musso, affectionately known to his loved ones as Buddy, was born in 1939 in the state of New Jersey, into a working-class Italian-American family. He was the kind of man who left a mark not because he was loud or powerful, but because he was gentle, sincere, and endlessly trusting. Though he was mildly intellectually disabled, Buddy functioned independently. He worked for years as a bagger in a local ShopRite grocery store in Cliffside Park, earning a modest living and building a quiet, contented life. Friends and neighbors recalled him as kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and always smiling, a man who never met a stranger and who believed the best in people, even when he shouldn't have. After the passing of his wife, Buddy grew increasingly lonely. The years slipped by, and so did the comfort of daily companionship. Longing for love and someone to share his remaining years with, he turned to a matchmaking service or pen pal agency, hoping to find a partner who could understand his heart, and perhaps even grow old with him. That's when he met Suzanne Basso, a woman who presented herself as warm, nurturing, and eager for companionship. In letters and phone calls, she showered him with affection, promises of marriage, and stories of a cozy life together under the Texas sun. She told him she had a home, family, and love waiting for him in Houston. She said he would never be lonely again. What Buddy didn't know was that every word was a lie. Desperate for connection and hope, Buddy left everything he knew behind. His job, his modest apartment, his familiar routines, and even his adult son. He packed a few belongings and boarded a bus bound for Texas, entrusting his future to a woman he had never met in person. He believed he was stepping into love. In truth, he was walking into a trap. And here is where we must all pause and ask ourselves, how does a man searching only for love end up tortured, humiliated, and murdered by the very people he trusted most? How does someone's yearning for kindness become the very weapon used to destroy him? In Houston, Buddy was introduced not to a caring partner, but to a household of predators, a toxic web of manipulators assembled around Suzanne Basso, each one seemingly eager to impress her or gain her favor. But to them, Buddy wasn't a person. He was a means to an end. Shortly after his arrival, he was forced to sign over his life insurance policy and Social Security benefits. The promises of love and family quickly vanished, replaced with daily abuse, starvation, and degrading treatment. Still, by most accounts, Buddy never fought back. He never raised his voice. He didn't even run. He stayed, perhaps hoping that if he just waited, the kindness she promised would finally come. But it never did. As Buddy Musso unpacked his few belongings and settled into the home where he thought he'd start a new life with Suzanne Basso, what he didn't know was that he had just walked into a well-orchestrated trap, a plot rooted not in love, but in greed, cruelty, and cold, calculated deception. Suzanne Basso had devised a plan, one that revolved around collecting Buddy's $60,000 life insurance policy. She convinced him to name her as the beneficiary. And once that signature was on paper, Musso's fate was sealed. But she wasn't going to do it alone. She had help. Her inner circle, a disturbing mix of relatives and hangers-on, formed the web of what would become a 6-person conspiracy to commit murder. These weren't strangers. These were people she trusted, manipulated, and possibly dominated, people who lived with her, ate with her, laughed with her, and would soon commit a monstrous act at her command. At the center was her biological son, Carmine Basso, a man who went by the name James O'Malley, sharing the same fake surname his mother had adopted. Raised under Suzanne's delusions and lies, Carmine had a turbulent upbringing shaped by abuse, instability, and blind loyalty to his mother. But now, as an adult, he became her right hand in what would be one of the most gruesome killings in Texas history. Then there was Bernice Aarons Miller, a longtime associate of Suzanne's and Bernice's 2 adult children, Craig and Hope Aarons. Alongside them was Teresa Singleton, Craig's fiancée. Together, the 6 of them shared a small, dingy home, a chaotic environment thick with codependency, delusion, and desperation. These were not hardened criminals, but rather a dysfunctional, broken group of people, each drawn into Suzanne's world and willing to follow her lead. Over a span of 5 brutal days, the conspiracy unfolded inside the house like a horror film come to life. Musso was beaten with fists, belts, and blunt objects. His skin was burned with scalding water. He was forced to sit in his own waste, denied food and water, and humiliated repeatedly. They shaved his head, poured cleaning products on his wounds, and mocked him as he cried in pain. They stripped him of his dignity, his hope, and his humanity, reducing him to an object, something disposable. During these days of terror, no one intervened. No one called for help. In fact, they laughed. They filmed some of it. They watched his slow deterioration like it was a game. And Suzanne, the architect of this evil, was present through it all, watching, directing, and ensuring that everything was going according to plan. Because in her mind, once Buddy was dead, a payout was coming. One that would fix her debts, support her lies, and reward her cruelty. In the final stretch of his life, Buddy Musso became the helpless victim of a cruelty so extreme, so drawn out, that it stands among the most grotesque acts of torture ever recorded in a Texas homicide investigation. After days of sustained physical assault, psychological torment, and neglect, Musso's body finally gave out, no longer able to absorb the endless beatings, the pain, or the humiliation. He had been stripped of everything. His health, his dignity, and ultimately his life. In that Jacinto City home, Buddy was not simply murdered, he was systematically destroyed. The people he trusted, those he believed were his new family, took turns brutalizing him. He was struck repeatedly with fists, belts, and blunt objects, including a vacuum cleaner hose. But it didn't stop there. At one point, they poured cleaning chemicals like bleach and pine sol directly onto his open wounds, watching as his skin blistered and burned. The abuse wasn't accidental. It wasn't a moment of rage. It was a sustained and coordinated attack that unfolded over several days. He was forced to sleep on the floor in his own urine and feces, denied food, denied water, and denied any medical attention, even as he could barely move. At one point, his head was shaved, not as an act of care, but as an added humiliation. His speech slurred. His body swelled. His breathing grew shallow. But instead of helping him, they kept going. And when Buddy finally died, too weak, too broken to hold on any longer, his killers didn't stop to grieve or even pause in shock. They didn't call the police or tell the truth. They wrapped his lifeless body in a plastic sheet, stuffed him in a blue laundry container, and drove him across town as if disposing of garbage. They dumped his body in a roadside ditch in Galena Park, a working-class suburb of Houston, hoping that the weather, animals, or time would erase what they had done. But less than 24 hours later, a local jogger spotted something strange, something wrapped in plastic at the edge of a drainage ditch. Police were called, and what they discovered sent shockwaves through the department. The body pulled from that ditch wasn't just dead, it was mutilated beyond recognition. At the morgue, the truth was fully revealed. According to the official autopsy, Louis Musso had suffered over 250 separate injuries, not a typo but a brutal reality. His body bore deep bruises from head to toe. His ribs were broken, his fingers fractured, his skull cracked. There were chemical burns on his chest, back, and legs. His lungs and brain showed signs of swelling due to repeated trauma. His genitals were bruised. His spine showed stress fractures. There wasn't a single region of his body that hadn't been attacked. The medical examiner stated that his injuries resembled what you'd expect from a high-speed car crash, or a war zone. But this wasn't an accident. It wasn't an explosion. This was done intentionally by human hands. Veteran homicide detectives, people who had seen cartel executions and domestic mass murders, were stunned. One officer would later say, "I've seen evil in my career. But this was depravity. There was no logic to it. No justification. Just a slow, painful annihilation of a man whose only crime was wanting to be loved." And when investigators pieced it together, when they learned how he had been lured with promises of marriage, how he'd trusted Suzanne Basso with his life savings, and how she and her accomplices had tortured him for days before killing him for a $60,000 insurance policy, it became clear. This was not a crime of passion. It was a premeditated, organized, and brutal execution, motivated by greed and carried out with chilling precision. Buddy Musso wasn't a nobody. He was a father. A friend. A kind, simple man with an open heart. And now, his broken body was at the center of one of the most disturbing murder cases in Texas history. After Buddy Musso's body was discovered in a drainage ditch, the Galena Park Police Department and Harris County homicide investigators launched a full-scale investigation, determined to uncover not just who had killed him, but why, and how such a brutal crime had taken place over several days without anyone stepping in to stop it. At first, it wasn't clear who Buddy Musso was. He had no ID on him. His face was nearly unrecognizable due to swelling and bruises. But a break came quickly, thanks to a tip from a local informant, who had heard disturbing rumors about a disabled man being abused in a nearby home. That home belonged to Suzanne Basso. When officers visited Basso's house in Jacinto City, they found evidence that would later seal her fate: traces of blood, bleach-soaked cleaning supplies, Buddy's clothing, and signs of a violent struggle. Her home was not just filthy, it was a crime scene layered in pain and silence. During questioning, Basso showed no visible grief, no panic, and no genuine concern. Instead, she spun an elaborate and bizarre tale about Buddy leaving town suddenly, claiming she didn't know where he went. She even attempted to present herself as his grieving fiancé, crying to reporters and investigators while maintaining a strangely cold, mechanical tone behind the scenes. But her act didn't hold. Within days, police arrested Basso and 5 others: her son James J.J. O'Malley, her roommate Bernice Miller, Bernice's children Craig and Hope Rutledge, and Hope's fiancé, Terrence Singleton. Cell phone records, witness testimony, and forensic evidence tied them all to the days of abuse Buddy endured before his death. But Basso was clearly the ringleader, the one who manipulated the others, directed the violence, and held control over the household with a mix of charm, threat, and delusion. When the case went to trial in 1999, it became a media sensation in Texas. Courtroom seats were packed. Reporters lined the steps. The public wanted to understand how a woman, someone claiming to be a caretaker and fiancé, could be capable of such evil. In court, the prosecution painted a chilling picture. Basso had lured Musso to Texas under false pretenses, convinced him they would be married, and then coordinated a plan to torture him for days, all so she could collect on a fake $60,000 life insurance policy that listed her as the beneficiary. Witnesses testified that she had laughed at Buddy's suffering. One even claimed she made jokes while he cried in pain. Prosecutors played audio of Basso making sarcastic remarks about Buddy's injuries. When asked about Musso's condition during the abuse, one witness said, "He begged her to stop. She didn't care." Her defense attorneys tried to claim she was mentally ill and had been manipulated herself, portraying her as delusional and unstable. Basso claimed she was innocent, that she was being framed by the others, and that she had loved Buddy. But the jury wasn't convinced. Her demeanor in court, a mix of narcissism, arrogance, and denial, only deepened their certainty. In October 1999, Suzanne Basso was found guilty of capital murder. The verdict was unanimous. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury didn't take long to deliberate, and when it returned, it delivered a punishment as rare as it was final: death by lethal injection. Her co-defendants received different sentences. James O'Malley, her son, got life in prison. Bernice Miller, Hope Rutledge, Craig Rutledge, and Terrence Singleton were all sentenced to long terms, ranging from 20 years to life for their roles in the assault and murder. But only Basso received the death penalty, a decision that sparked fierce debate across the country. Some questioned whether a woman with clear signs of psychological instability should face execution. Others argued that her manipulative behavior and level of control made her far more dangerous than her co-defendants. Mental health professionals described her as a textbook narcissist with delusions of grandeur, someone who lived in a fantasy world of lies and control. But the jury didn't waver. In the end, justice for Louis Musso came in the form of 6 convictions. But it was Suzanne Basso who became the face of the crime, and the focal point in heated conversations about mental illness, capital punishment, and the monstrous capacity of human cruelty. Following her 1999 conviction for the capital murder of Louis "Buddy" Musso, Suzanne Margaret Basso spent nearly 15 years on death row at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, a high-security women's prison known for housing some of the most dangerous female inmates in the state. There, behind concrete walls and razor wire, Basso waited out the years through a series of appeals, legal challenges, and mental health reviews. Her defense attorneys tried multiple times to overturn her sentence, arguing that Basso suffered from severe mental illness, including delusional disorder and symptoms of post-traumatic stress from her abusive childhood. They claimed she was not mentally competent to be executed. Yet, in ruling after ruling, both state and federal courts affirmed that she was not only legally sane, but fully aware of her actions, and of the punishment that awaited her. As her execution date approached, the case sparked renewed national debate. Was justice truly being served by executing a mentally unstable woman? Or was this simply the rightful conclusion to a crime so brutal, so coldly orchestrated, that even seasoned law enforcement officers were shaken by its cruelty? On February 5, 2014, Suzanne Basso was scheduled to die by lethal injection at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Huntsville Unit, also known as the Walls Unit. As the sun began to set, witnesses gathered on both sides of the prison's red brick walls. Some protesters holding signs opposing the death penalty, while others stood silently, waiting for justice for Buddy Musso. Shortly after 6 p.m., Basso was escorted from her holding cell to the execution chamber. Dressed in a white prison uniform, she was strapped to the gurney with methodical precision. Her face, once known for manipulative charm and theatrical outbursts in court, now appeared calm, almost vacant. When asked if she had any final words, Suzanne Basso declined to make a statement. No apologies. No last-minute confessions. No words to the Musso family, who had waited over a decade to hear her acknowledge her crime. Only silence. At exactly 6:26 p.m. Central Time, the execution began. A single dose of pentobarbital flowed into her veins. The drug acted swiftly. Her eyes closed. Her breathing slowed. Within seconds her body went still. A few moments later she was officially pronounced dead, at 6:26 p.m., the same minute the injection had started. There was no delay. No dramatic final gasp. Just a quiet, clinical ending to a life that had caused unspeakable pain. Suzanne Basso became the 14th woman executed in the United States since capital punishment was reinstated in 1976, and only the 5th woman to be executed in Texas in nearly 150 years. Her death made headlines across the country, some describing it as long overdue justice, others as a haunting example of how the American justice system handles mental illness and female offenders. Outside the prison, Louis Musso's family issued a short but poignant statement. "We'll never forget what Buddy went through, but we can finally start to let him rest in peace." If you found this story disturbing and important, hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think justice was served in this case? Let us know.